Have you ever sat in that heavy silence at a family dinner? Here on Women's Diaries Voice, we retell those moments honest, every day sometimes controversial. Every story is a mirror. Subscribe, join the conversation, and maybe find a little healing. Albuquerque mornings don't wake up so much as they warm open. The blue over the sandias bleaches into daylight. The stucco holds the night's chill for one last minute, and the backyard looks like a blank stage. I watched it from the kitchen window with a mug that said Mission Control in crooked vinyl letters I'd ironed on myself. The coffee was strong enough to sting. That felt right. Today needed edges. Evan padded in wearing socks and a cardboard helmet he'd painted the night before. He'd cut the visor from a sheet of acetate and taped a gold star on one corner where the plastic refused to lie flat. "Morning, Commander Mom," he said, voice echoing faintly inside the helmet. "Commander Brooks," I saluted, pre-flight status. He pushed the helmet up. Hair stuck out in 3 directions. Checklist complete. Lunar surface raked. Rocket launcher primed. Galaxy cake stabilized in cold storage. Question: can we hang the solar system again? 2 planets fell while I was asleep. 2 planets were overworked, I said. We'll rehang them after pancakes. We had a routine for days that mattered 3 pancakes, 1 for practice, 2 for luck, the last one shaped like whatever the day needed. Today, it was Saturn, a ring of powdered sugar around a lopsided disc. Evan ate it solemnly. When he grinned, sugar dusted his upper lip like frost. He shrugged into the t-shirt we'd thrifted and ironed with a blue NASA worm logo, then the khaki shorts with a pocket big enough for his field notebook. He carried that book everywhere. Now his handwriting a climb of constellations and questions. Why is Vega so bright? Can you see the ISS with just your eyes? Does the moon get tired of being looked at? In the yard, the desert had already begun to press. Heat rose in faint waves off the gravel. We'd strung strands of fairy lights across the fence and draped dark fabric as a night sky splattered with acrylic so that it glittered when the sun hit just so. A sandpit we'd called the Lunar Module Landing Zone held plastic footprints and planted flags. Near the patio, a sign I'd stenciled read, "Welcome to Space Camp. Please check in at Mission Control." Mission Control was a folding table under the shade sail laden with name badges, black Sharpies, and a bowl of silver-wrapped chocolate meteorites. In the side yard beneath the mesquite sat the water rocket launcher, a tripod of PVC that had stretched my confidence at Home Depot. Mr. Padilla next door had peeked over the fence while I tested it Friday night and whistled when an empty soda bottle shot above the roofline. "That's gonna get a cheer," he'd said. "What time you need my cooler?" 11, I told him. "We start at noon." He'd promised to roll it over full of ice. Good neighbors are a kind of gravity. By 9, the Galaxy Cake's buttercream had set in pale swirls, the purple and black marbled like a storm. I dotted edible stars along the edges and pressed a candy astronaut into the side as if he were climbing. Shortcuts in life, you learn them if you can. Cakes accept help. So do people, though, not all the time. At 11:15, Evan stood on the patio and turned the telescope's knobs the way other kids smooth a baseball glove. "Grandma said she wants to see the craters again," he told me. "She liked the craters last time when the moon was big." She did. I said, tying a length of fishing line to Pluto and hooking it to the pergola so our tiny solar system was whole again. The line caught the light like a hair in sunlight. My phone abraded the counter with its soft buzzes all morning. The messages in the family thread were polite little bricks. "Sounds fun." "Can't wait." "Save me a seat." Avery had added a meteor emoji and then another, as if excitement might be measured. I'd sent paper invitations 2 weeks ago with a note clipped inside each card. "Ruth, your binoculars found the ISS that night. Evan won't stop talking about it, and stamps I'd chosen because the post office had a set with planets. It had felt old-fashioned and important. Evan had sketched Orion on the back of Ruth's envelope with a ballpoint pen and whispered, "She'll like it if it looks like winter, though it was May, all wind and sun, and dust devils in the cul-de-sac." At 11:50, we set the name badges out. Tyler. Zoe. T.A. Grandma. Ruth and Adai Leela. Avery. The marker ink bled a little into the lanyard fabric. It made each name look like it had a halo. "Can I be in charge of the sign-in?" Evan asked, chest forward, now the way he stands when I tell him he's right. "All yours," I said. "Mission specialist." At noon, the radio in the kitchen ran an ad for a furniture store that always sounds like a dare. Somewhere, a motorcycle droned. A brown quail hurried under the fence with 6 smaller shadows behind it. The driveway, white and clean as a blank page, stayed blank. Maybe I should have called someone then. Maybe I should have texted twice. I did neither. It's a particular American superstition, the belief that if you fuss less, you're less vulnerable. Instead, I adjusted the tablecloth and shoved more ice into the lemonade cooler until the lemonade looked like light. Evan stood at the edge of the lawn with his field notebook down by his side. He stared at the bend in our street where cars rounded from the main road. He had drawn tiny arrows in chalk pointing toward our gate. I'd watched him make them earlier, tongue between his teeth, each arrow the same length and angle. The chalk blue matched his shirt. "Mom." His voice didn't wobble. That surprised me more than anything. "Do you think Aunt Lila forgot the binoculars? She might be running late," I said. My body did the math. I wasn't willing to think noon had turned into 12:10, had turned into 12:20. The sun had slid to the angle that bakes the top of your forearms when you reach for plates. He nodded like an adult in a meeting which felt wrong on a face still freckled from last week's field day. He went to the sign-in sheet and straightened the Sharpie and the little tape dispenser in a neat row, the way he straightens his pencils before a spelling test. At 12:30, a gust lifted the corner of the welcome banner. I fixed it with a second strip of tape and saw reflected in the kitchen window Evan standing in the doorway behind me, helmet under his arm. "I made a star map for Grandma," he said. "Quiet now. I drew where the scorpion is so she can find it faster." "That's a beautiful map," I said. I touched the paper with the tip of my finger where he'd marked Antares with a star that had too many points. It looked like a sun. "Let's put it somewhere safe so she doesn't bend it." "Okay?" He slid the map into the pocket of his field notebook and closed the cover like closing a door. By 1, I'd stopped pretending to check the timer I hadn't set. The cake was steady under its dome. The rocket launcher sat primed and a little ridiculous. Mr. Padilla hadn't rolled over his cooler after all, and I knew that meant he'd seen the empty driveway and kept his kindness to himself. Even good neighbors measure their mercies. "Do you think they drove past and didn't see?" Evan asked from the window. His palm was flat against the glass. The prints it left looked like 5 small moons. "I can draw bigger arrows." "You drew them the right size," I said. "Your arrows were perfect." There are sentences you don't say out loud because they might scare the thing you intend to hold together. I didn't say those. We went out and tested the rocket anyway because I promised him we would no matter what. I pumped air until the bottle trembled, and Evan braced himself, feet in lunar sand. 3. He counted grip tight on the launch cord. 2. 1. The bottle shot wide and fast and broke the noon quiet into applause we made with our own throats. He grinned without checking the driveway first. That mattered too. The water rain fell back in drops that cooled our shins. We tried again, and once more for luck. On the 3rd launch, the bottle fell hard in the bougainvillea and rattled pink petals to the ground. Evan laughed. It was a small laugh, but it didn't break anywhere on the way out. "Mission control," he said, helmet back on. His voice echoed. "Request authorization for cake." "Permission granted," I said. I wiped my hands on a towel and made myself steady. The plates looked brave in their stack. The lighter clicked on the 2nd try, then the 3rd. Flame took the wick and flared into a curve. I didn't count candles aloud. Evan watched the flames instead of the street. When he closed his eyes, he did it like opening a book. I sang just me, not loudly. The wind caught the last note and put it somewhere else. He blew and the smoke lifted in a thin ribbon. I set the first slice on a plate and pressed a fork into his hand. "Happy birthday, kid," I said. He took a bite and nodded once like he was memorizing the taste for later. We ate standing up. The sugar stuck to our teeth, purple and black, the color of a sky that hasn't decided yet. In the kitchen, the radio returned to the weather. "Clear," the voice said. "Hotter this afternoon." I rinsed the knife and watched the driveway through the window. The street held its breath. I stacked the plates anyway. By late afternoon, the house had the quiet of a theater. After the audience files out confetti under chairs, a stray program on the aisle. The banner sagged. The rocket launcher leaned like a folded tripod in a photographer's trunk. I wrapped the leftover cake, as if careful plastic could keep the day from drying out rinsed purple buttercream from the knife and stacked plates until the cupboard felt full enough to pass as normal. Evan fell asleep early with his cardboard helmet at the foot of the bed and his field notebook half open, a star map peeking from the pocket. I slid the notebook in the drawer of his nightstand and stood a minute to watch his chest rise. The glow-in-the-dark constellations we'd stuck to a ceiling years ago were now a faint chalky scatter. Many of them peeled at the edges, tiny moons uncoupling from their sky. On Monday, the desert wind came back in its usual April mood, scattering grit into the seams of the back door. My phone rang at 3. "Ms. Brooks, this is Ms. Henderson. She taught second grade like a conductor clean, motions a sense of tempo you could trust. I wanted to check in about Evan. He's been a little, not himself." "How so?" I slid into the parking lot at the school and watched the line of cars move in increments. A dust devil twisted across the far field. He's hanging back in groups. At recess, he sat by the shade wall and watched the kickball game he usually plays. When I asked if he wanted to join, he said, "It's fine. The sky isn't for everybody." She let the words sit. "He's tender, which is part of what makes him wonderful. I just wanted you to have a heads up." "Thank you," I said. The kickball thumped against a chain-link fence somewhere I couldn't see. "I appreciate the call." That night, the first nightmare found him. He came to my room tangled in his blanket, warm with a sleep sweat that smelled like crayons and soap. "I couldn't get the door to the observatory open," he said into my shoulder. Everyone got inside, and I was still counting the stairs. "We're here," I whispered. I didn't say more. The kind of quiet he needed was the kind that holds. Tuesday, we tried homework at the kitchen table the way we always did. He took out his field notebook for spelling words, then pushed it aside and reached for the iPad to open the comics app. "Space can be for later," he said, like he was being kind to me. I made mac and cheese and pretended to talk about nothing. On Thursday, I called the clinic on San Mateo and asked for a child therapist. The receptionist said try Dr. Alvarez. Tuesdays at 4, open up next week. The waiting room had a terrarium with lethargic lizards and a poster of the solar system in the wrong order. Evan corrected it under his breath, tapping the glass at the mislabeled orbits, then folded himself into a chair. Sneakers together, as if practicing for something that needed discipline. Dr. Alvarez had gentle eyebrows and a voice that made space. She asked Evan about the telescope, about favorite snacks, about how it feels when you're looking for someone and the driveway stays empty. He kept his eyes on the rug and said, "Like you're small, but not in the fun way." When she asked me to join at the end, she spoke like a person who has known both theory and mornings. "He understands more than he can name," she said. "Consistency helps. So do clear boundaries he can see, not just here." I nodded. I had the feeling of being handed a map you didn't know you needed until it was in your hands. 3 weeks unspooled. Evan's teacher sent a photo of him reading under a tree with 2 boys from his class. His smile looked like a trial version that might turn permanent if allowed. He stopped tapping the telescope every time a car turned into the cul-de-sac, but he still glanced quick and quiet the way you check the oven light, even when you know what you put inside. On a Tuesday after early release, we did our usual library, then ice cream. The branch on Wyoming smelled like old paper and lemon cleaner. The aisles a cool grid against the afternoon heat. Evan checked out a book with a lenticular cover stars that moved when you tilted it, and another about rocket fuel that I was pretty sure would give him ideas. At the ice cream place around the corner, he ordered 2 scoops of cookies and cream and balanced the plastic spoon on the rim like a tiny seesaw. My phone buzzed against the table with a vibration I knew. Before I looked, a family thread, the particular insistence of a group chat you didn't start. A digital invitation filled the screen, gold on black like a formal program for a night you rent. Avery's Sweet 16, desert glamping, plus a drone show. It read in a serif font that had opinions. Below private campsite near Santa Fe, live acoustic set, drone choreography over the arroyo. Then in smaller letters, tidy as a bill, contribution, $1 and $200 per person. Please Venmo Ruth by May 10 to secure your place. Additional gifts welcome, but not required. A personal note followed from my mother Maya Avery. Specifically asked if you could design the cosmic photo backdrop like the one from that series she loves. You have such an eye. We'll need you for setup Friday. Beneath that, replies bloomed like a time-lapse Lila. So excited Aunt Joni wouldn't miss it. Cousin Preston payment sent. The same names who had not pulled into a driveway with a chalk arrow pointing them home. Another buzz. A private text from Lila. Mom says you haven't responded. Don't be difficult. You're good at the creative stuff and this is important. Also, Avery is nervous. Please confirm. Across the table, Evan set his spoon down and pressed his thumbs into the condensation ring his cup had made, quietly shaping the water into a comet. Can I get extra napkins? He asked. The question made room. I got up and came back with a fistful sat and scrolled once more through the thread photos of a rental brochure with white canvas tents and Edison bulbs strung against dusk, a screenshot of a menu with words like artisanal and tasting, the due date in a neat line underlined twice. I opened the payment app and typed Ruth Carter. In the amount box I entered 0.16. The memo line blinked a little pale tunnel. I wrote, "Congratulations." I took a screenshot of the sent receipt and filed it in a folder on my phone labeled with a word I didn't say out loud. Then I set the phone face down and pushed Evan's napkins closer. He folded one into a square, then a smaller square, then a triangle the way kids make a boat. Do you want to stop by the park before we go home? I asked. He nodded. At the park, a breeze carried the smell of cut grass from a field we never used because the sprinklers misfired. He sat on the low wall by the swings and told me about a chapter in his new book that insisted the moon had a temperature that sounded like a brick oven. He made the hand motions he makes when he's excited, and for a few minutes the day's bones felt like they had flesh again. That evening, after the dishes and the math worksheet and a failed attempt at catching Venus before the streetlights came on, I pulled out the folding ladder and rehung 2 of the glow stars that had sagged. Evan watched from his bed, his socks rolled in a ball by his toes. Can we change where Scorpius goes? He asked. It looks weird next to the bookshelf. We can, I said. I pressed the plastic to the ceiling until it stuck. Does that look better? He squinted one eye. Yeah. I sat on the edge of the bed and smoothed the comforter, which had planets faded from 100 washes. I want to tell you something, I said, and kept my voice even, the tone you use when you share directions instead of alarms. You know how your teacher has rules in her classroom, so that everyone learns, and no one gets pushed to the back. Like no shouting out and don't take someone else's markers, he said, half smiling. Like that I said, we're going to have a rule for our home. We spend our time with people who make us feel good and safe. People who show up when they say they will. That might mean we see some people less for a while. He let the idea tilt through him, the way he tilts the kaleidoscope at the bookstore testing how the colors land. Like Tyler's family, he said finally. They came to the school star thing when nobody else did. Exactly like that, I said. Like Mr. Padilla's cooler when the grill burns hot. Like Ms. Henderson reading circles on Tuesdays. I tucked the blanket along his side, a small geometry of comfort. We get to choose who sits close. Will Grandma be mad? His voice was plain. No wobble. She might feel a lot of things, I said. We're still allowed to have our rule. He reached for his field notebook and slid the star map out. Okay, he said, as if he were writing it down even when he wasn't. He tucked the map under his pillow like a talisman and turned on his side hand, open fingers slack. In the kitchen, I rinsed 2 glasses, set them upside down on the towel, and checked the back door out of habit. The arrows Evan had drawn on the sidewalk were ghost faint under the porch light blue turned to milk. I locked the deadbolt and turned off the lamps one by one until the house was a low hum. Upstairs, the plastic constellations caught the last of the light and held it small and stubborn the way some things do when you let them. The next morning, the desert light came in clean and angled, picking out dust on the banister like pollen. I set the ladder by the front door and unscrewed the old brass deadbolt that had stuck twice last winter. The new lock came out of a cardboard box with a picture of a smiling family who looked confident about entries and exits. I read the manual twice and followed the diagram with a pencil tucked behind my ear wires, like thin veins battery tray snapping in place with a crisp click. When the keypad lit up the tone, it made sounded like a small yes. Can I pick the code? Evan asked from the mat, knees up, chin on them, socks gray at the heel. You can help, I said. He thought eyes on the ceiling as if the numbers might be up there. 0715, he said finally. July 15th. That meteor shower last year. Approved, I said. He entered it with careful fingertip presses, then did it again to test. The lock chittered and slid. Inside my ribs something slid too. I carried the old deadbolt to the toolbox and labeled a bin with blue tape. Old hardware, like a person who intends to put things exactly where they belong. On the counter, I opened a fresh manila folder and started the kind of project people put off until they don't. I printed the digital invitation, the replies my doajim sintin receipt our mailer with the planet stamps, and clipped them in sequence. I added call logs, a copy of Evan's star map, in case I needed to remember the shape of a day. The binder took on weight against my palm like an honest book. The group thread kept humming. I stopped looking. When my phone rang, the caller ID said Mrs. Garcia next door, who never called, only waved. I picked up. "Your mother stopped me outside," she said softly, the way people talk near napping babies. "She asked if I'd check on you because your phone is broken. I told her you were fine yesterday when you asked me for baking powder." She paused. "Just letting you know." "Thank you," I said. "If she asks again, you can tell her the truth." "We're fine." "That's what I told her," Mrs. Garcia said. "And if you need sugar, you don't have to invent a cake." I smiled, a real one. I might need sugar anyway. By noon, a delivery van rolled slow to the curb and left a white basket wrapped in cellophane on our porch. I saw it from the front room and knew what it was before I read the card. A plush toy with wide eyes, 2 gift cards in a sleeve, chocolate in a gold box that looked like it wanted a holiday. The card said in a script that tried very hard, "From your loving family." No signatures, just a phrase like a blanket you lay over something sharp. Evan stepped around me. "Is that for me?" he asked, neutral as weather. "It's from people who want us to feel better," I said. "But they didn't say the part that matters." "You have to use your words," he said, repeating something he'd learned in a room with a rug and a basket of puppets. "You do," I said. He touched the cellophane with one finger. "Can we give it to the hospital?" "The one with the fish tank?" "Yes," I said. I wrote a note on an index card for a kid who needs a good day, from Evan and Maya. We drove the basket across town. At the children's reception desk, a nurse with a sunflower pin took it with both hands, the way people take babies. Evan pressed the card through the slot in the plastic shield like a message in a bottle. We stood a minute to look at the fish, blue and yellow, lazy in their loop, and then we left. Back home, I sat at the kitchen table and scrolled through settings until I found the place where you can silence a person without erasing them. I turned off the family thread, then blocked 2 numbers, then 3. The quiet in the room wasn't empty. It was the quiet you earn. On Thursday after school, we drove to the community center off Wyoming, where a flyer had advertised stargazers. Wednesdays and Thursdays. All ages, curious minds. The rec room smelled like gym floor and crayons. On a folding table, a volunteer named Lynn set out cardboard circles and skewers and told the kids to build a model solar system that didn't have to be correct, so long as each circle had a reason. "What's your reason?" she asked Evan. He considered. "I'm putting Jupiter close to Earth because it makes me feel safe when the big one is nearby." "That's a good reason," she said, and moved on. At dusk, a retiree with a cap that said Sandia Labs rolled a travel telescope onto the asphalt outside. 10 kids rotated through a solemn line that shuffled in the sound of Velcro shoes. Evan put his eye to the eyepiece and said nothing for longer than usual. When he looked up, there was the particular shine he gets when a fact fits in his brain like a right key. "What did you see?" I asked. "Sunspots," he said. "It looks like a potato, but if the potato was on fire..." He laughed, and the laugh didn't break anywhere. I filled out a sign-in sheet, and a liability waiver printed my name, wrote my number, another parent, a woman with a high bun, and a tote bag that said read. Local offered me a seat. "I'm Nora," she said. "That's my kid with the dinosaur shirt. He doesn't love dinosaurs so much as the idea of old things. I think they call that being 9. "Evan says the sky is old," I said. "Maybe that's why they like it," she said. We traded numbers without making a ceremony of it. That weekend, a voicemail landed in my work inbox, the number disguised as unknown caller, in a way that never is. Lila's voice came through clipped and brisk. "Mom says you're not picking up. Stop making this difficult. You're acting unstable and people are worried. If you won't answer, there are ways to make sure you're okay. Call me in the next 24 hours. On Monday, 3 texts from numbers I didn't recognize arrived within a minute, cousins I hadn't heard from at Christmas, a neighbor of my mother's, someone who claimed to be a friend of a friend. Each said some version of "we're concerned." Please reconsider, family is everything, and one that made my hand go cold. It's not safe to keep a child from his grandmother. I laid the phone on the counter and went upstairs to check on the glow stars. 2 had fallen. I pressed them back onto the ceiling with the heel of my hand until I felt the adhesive warm and give. I stood 1 more minute counting the pattern. Scorpius had found a better home across from the bookshelf. Small changes matter. At our next appointment, Dr. Alvarez listened while I described the basket. The calls, the messages that had gone out to people who didn't know our Tuesday routines or the names of Evan's teachers. "You're doing the right thing," she said, simple as tap water. "Keep a record. Decide when silence is protection and when a single neutral statement clears a path." She turned to Evan. "What helps when you feel that squeezed feeling we talked about?" "My notebook," he said, hand on the cover where the paper showed through the spiral. "And going outside." "Let's make sure you have both," she said. That night, I walked through the house and put the binder of records in the file drawer with the passports and the lease. I taped our contact list inside the pantry door, Ms. Henderson, pediatrician. 2 neighbors, the community center names that meant something. The new lock's chime sounded when I tested it. It was still a small yes, and it still sounded like a key fitting. On Wednesday, we took another basket, our own this time, to the community garden down by the Arroyo tomatoes, a blue-handled trowel, a packet of seeds Evan had picked for the picture on the front, tiny stars that promised zinnias. He pressed the seeds into a rectangle of soil. I watered. He labeled the row with a wooden stick. Evan letters careful. A man from 2 plots over said first time and showed him how deep to go. The sun slid lower and bumped its shoulder on the mountains. When we got home, the porch was empty and the air smelled faintly of creosote, even though it hadn't rained. I unlocked the door. The keypad lit up. The lock answered. Evan went straight to his room and lined up 3 rocks he'd found in the arroyo. 2 gray one with a stripe white as chalk. He held the striped one under the lamp. "This one looks like a planet that got a letter wrong and wrote across itself," he said. "It does," I said. My phone buzzed on the table. A message from an email address I didn't recognize. The subject line said, "In good faith." The body said, "We're ready to move past this unpleasantness. If you apologize and contribute to Avery's event, we can forget the misunderstanding. Otherwise, we'll have to take appropriate steps. This is your last chance, Maya." It was signed with my mother's name and an initial that wasn't hers. I took a screenshot, filed it under the tab I titled Correspondence, and stood a minute to feel the kitchen floor under my feet. I dialed a number a friend had given me at the playground 2 summers ago, one I'd saved and never called. Klein and Patel, a receptionist, said bright and crisp. A minute later, a woman with a straightforward voice came on. "This is Rachel Klein," I explained without decoration. She listened without interruption. When I finished, she said, "I'd like you to email the documentation you have." "All of it. We'll prepare a letter instructing them to stop contacting you directly and through others. If the behavior continues, we can escalate. You're a fit custodial parent. You decide who has access to your child. Keep doing what you're doing." Records calm, clear lines. I sent the email from the table binder open beside the laptop like a mirror in paper. The attachments stacked in the outbox and then disappeared one by one. Evan padded in wearing pajama pants with planets the laundry hadn't yet faded. He leaned on my shoulder and looked at the open tabs, uninterested in words he can't pronounce. "Can we read the rocket fuel book?" he asked. "We can," I said. We sat on the couch and read about liquid oxygen in a voice we made up brief and serious, stopping to sound out names with more consonants than sense. When it was time for bed, he slid his field notebook under the pillow again and turned onto his side hand open. Downstairs, I washed 2 glasses, turned the lock until it answered and switched off the lamps. The keypad's tiny glow held steady in the dark, a constellation with 4 squares, 4 numbers, and a sound I had learned to trust. The cease and desist went out at 9:03 a.m., the timestamp neat and unblinking in my email. Rachel Klein's letter said what I hadn't found the right sentences to say: stop contacting my client directly or through others, Stop misrepresenting her fitness as a parent. Stop attempting to coerce payment. It read, cool, like a thermometer. I closed the laptop and rinsed my coffee mug until the water ran hot enough to fog the window. At 10, a knock sounded quick and paired official in a way you feel in your wrists. Through the peephole, 2 uniforms stood on the porch, hats in hand. The keypad threw a small square of light against the stucco. I opened the door. Maya Brooks. Yes, I'm Officer Delgado. This is Officer Pierce. He showed his badge the way you show a bus pass routine practiced. We're following up on a welfare call placed by a family member. Concern was expressed about your well-being and the welfare of your child. The room tilted half an inch and clicked back. We're fine, I said, and made myself softer. You're welcome to come in. They stepped onto the mat and glanced in the way people in uniforms are trained to glance corners, exits, high shelves. Delgado's gaze landed on the binder at the end of the kitchen counter and the science poster on the fridge with a coffee stain for Jupiter. Evan is at school, I said. He's in 2nd grade. You can see his backpack there. The backpack slumped against the bench where shoes congregate a small gravity. Pierce nodded toward the hallway. Mind if we look around? Go ahead. I kept my hands open and visible because it felt like a thing to do. We moved through the house Evan's room with the glow stars pressed back into place, the field notebook on the desk with a pencil inside like a bookmark. The bathroom with one towel still damp from morning. The fridge with leftovers labeled in my handwriting that looks like someone else's when I'm in a hurry. Delgado noted the calendar pinned above the trash can library days, circled therapy appointments written in a square hand, the word stargazers under Wednesday. Back in the kitchen, I slid the binder toward them without drama. There's been a lot of contact, I said, and not all of it direct. I didn't add that the phone calls had crawled under my skin like sand. Delgado flipped through the printed invitation, the flood of replies, the Uruguayan 16 receipt, the screenshots, the email from an address that wore my mother's name like a borrowed coat. You've been documenting, he said. Yes. Pierce's voice softened the way people talk when something isn't an emergency. You'd be surprised how often a welfare call is a proxy for a family argument, she said. Our job is to see what's in front of us. What we see is a clean house, food in the fridge, school routines, appointments kept. We'll file this as unfounded. Relief didn't arrive grandly. It set down its bag and sat on the edge of a chair. Delgado pulled a card from his chest pocket and slid it across the counter. If more calls like this come in, or if you feel harassed, contact us. Keep logging everything. That helps. Thank you, I said. It didn't cover it, but it was the word I had. After they left, I stood in the doorway and watched the patrol car's taillights shrink along the street we'd chalked with arrows 3 weeks earlier. My hands had that post-adrenaline tremble, the kind that takes its time leaving. I poured water and drank half, then called the school to say I'd be a few minutes early for pickup. In the car line, the sun did that Albuquerque thing where it fills the windshield like a lake. Kids flowed out of the double doors in waves, backpacks slung too low, paper crowns from some classroom project, a soccer ball that got dribbled sideways. Evan came out with Ms. Henderson, his hand halfway raised as he talked a gesture that meant he was explaining something worth explaining. When he saw me, he ran the last 10 steps and opened the passenger door with a quick tug. Ms. Henderson asked if we can bring the telescope next Tuesday, he said, fastening his seatbelt with a decisive click. Only if the rules say it's okay. We'll read the rules, I said. We'll figure it out. He settled with his headphones and an audiobook about constellations. I pulled forward and turned left toward home. That's when I saw my mother's car nose into the lot from the side street. Lila sat in the passenger seat, sunglasses bright as pennies. The car parked crooked in a space reserved for visitors. The engine stayed on. Lila got out first, a door slam that announced intention. Ruth followed, spine straight. Mouth determined the way she walks into a church or a store that has disappointed her. Evan, I said, keeping my voice low, headphones on, volume up. He obeyed without question. I put the car in park, stepped out, and closed my door gently, as if noise could tip the balance. How dare you? Ruth said, before she was within the range of polite distance. Blocking me. Sending that lawyer letter. You have humiliated this family. We're in a school lot, I said. Keep your voice down. I will not, she said, but she did a notch. Parents turned to look, then turned back the choreography of public discomfort. Lila took a step closer. sunglasses now on her head like a crown. "You're not well," she said evenly. "People are worried. You're isolating. Mom had no choice but to make sure you and Evan are safe." "Calling the police wasn't a safety check," I said. "It was a tactic." Ruth's chin lifted a degree. "We asked you to be part of this family event. Avery's birthday is important. You refused, you sent a mockery of a payment, and you think you can keep my grandson from me. That boy has a right to his grandmother." "Evan's rights are looked after by me," I said. "I'm his mother. I decide who's in his life." "There isn't an automatic right to visitation just because you're related. The officers who were just at my door saw a stable home. If you keep saying otherwise, I'll let the court keep the record." A pulse jumped at Lila's jaw. "You're jealous," she said the word flat with practice. "You've always been jealous. Mom has been generous, and you repay her by turning Evan against us." "I haven't said one unkind word to Evan about either of you," I said. "He knows what he's felt. He knows who shows up." I kept my hands at my sides. I could hear Evan's audiobook through the car door, a narrator saying Polaris the way news anchors say January. Ruth's voice softened in a way she probably believed was merciful. "You are being dramatic. One missed afternoon and you make a federal case. You have always been too sensitive." "Call it sensitive," I said. "I call it paying attention." My mouth was dry. I kept my tone even. "You stood in a mall food court the day you told me you had a migraine. You posted a picture with a caption about your favorite girls." Evan waited in a shirt he ironed himself and asked if his arrows weren't big enough. "Whatever this is, please don't ask me to call it normal." Silence rhythmed the air for a beat. A whistle blew on the far field, a long note that broke and reformed. Lila took a breath to speak, and then didn't. Ruth pressed her lips together and looked past me at the car, at the small head in headphones, at the small life she was used to stepping into without knocking. "We're done here," I said. "If you want to communicate, do it through my attorney." I stepped back toward my door. Ruth's hand lifted as if to take my arm. "Don't you walk away from me." "I am walking to my child," I said. I got in, closed the door, and watched them in the rearview mirror reduced to shapes. Evan slipped off one ear cup. "Were you arguing?" he asked. "We had a conversation," I said. "We're going home." At home, the lock chirped its small yes, and the door swung open on the smell of the cool house. Evan dropped his backpack and went straight to the table where the model solar system sat drying from glue. He adjusted Jupiter, the big one near Earth, and touched the dot he'd painted for the Great Red Spot. My phone vibrated with a new email. Rachel Klein received. Letter sent. 9:03 a.m. Also, based on your update, I'm filing for a temporary protective order this afternoon. Expect a call when it's signed. I typed "thank you" and left it at that. The part of me that wanted a paragraph learned to accept a sentence. Evan found the striped Arroyo rock and set it beside his pencil like a small planet with paperwork. "Can Nora and Tyler come over and help me build the comet tail?" he asked. "Maybe this weekend," I said, and meant it in the plain way. At 3:15, the doorbell rang a single push, not impatient. Through the peephole, a man in a beat-up sport coat held a folder just bigger than his hand. He shifted his weight like someone used to being stood up. I opened the door to the length of the chain. "Ms. Brooks." "I'm with the Sheriff's Civil Division." He held up the folder so I could see the top page, the stamped case number, and the words, "Temporary Order of Protection," in a font that doesn't joke. "Are you able to accept service?" "Yes," I said. I slid the chain open the door. He handed the papers over with the care people reserve for breakable things. "You also get this." Another page. "Cease and desist copies. Service on the other party is in progress. You'll see the instructions on the last sheet. If anyone violates this, call us." "Thank you," I said. The phrase was fast becoming a bead on a string, the only one that fit. He tilted his chin toward Evan in the background, both of us in the doorway picture. "Cool project," he said, and left. I put the papers in the binder. The binder took the weight and did not complain. Evan watched me slide the rings shut. "What's that?" he asked. "Grown-up paperwork," I said. "It keeps our house quiet." He nodded. "Accepting that houses can be quiet or not quiet for reasons that sound like office words." He pulled a chair to the counter and climbed up to open the cupboard where we keep the matches. "Can we light the twinkle lights?" he asked. "Go ahead." He switched them on a strip along the mantel, tiny diodes steady as a runway, and the room picked up a gentle glitter. He placed the striped rock beneath, and the light found the white band like a path. At dinner, he ate 2 tacos and asked why liquid oxygen is blue. I looked it up and read the answer out loud, a real thing in the world, exact and specific. After dishes, we took a slow walk to the corner and back. A neighbor hosed dust off his driveway and waved. The water ran in a fan across the gutter, darkening the concrete to slate. The air carried a faint scent like pennies and rain, the creosote smell that sometimes appears without reason. Inside, I ran bath water and listened to the bath turn sound into steam. Evan lined his toy astronauts along the tub's edge and wetted their helmets one by one. I folded towels and put one on the closed toilet lid and one on the rack. When he climbed out, his hair made cowlicks that would dry into a map. Before bed, he pulled the field notebook out and drew the day's sky in quick strokes, a rectangle for the doorbell, 2 dots for badge pins, a circle with a line through it that he labeled lock. He added a small square for the keypad and colored it in. "Do you want to tape that to the wall?" I asked. He shook his head. "Under the pillow." He slid it where the star map goes. I tucked the blanket to the correct geometry and turned off the lamp. The plastic constellations on the ceiling held the last of the light the way they are meant to. Downstairs, the keypad glowed low and patient, a constellation with 4 squares, a note that sounds the same every time and means the same thing when it does. 2 Saturdays later, the planetarium opened at 10 and smelled like carpet cleaned yesterday and metal warmed by hands. We were there early enough to watch the docent unlock the lobby pendulum and pull the pin so the brass weight began its quiet swing. Evan leaned over the railing and counted until the sand traced its first line. Nora arrived with Tyler in a tote that held pretzels and 2 juice boxes that clinked like minor instruments. 2 boys from Evan's class came with their parents. Mr. Padilla showed up in a collared shirt he wore to graduations, carrying a Polaroid he hadn't used since weddings were all barns. We bought 6 general admission tickets and one for the show with a narrator who said nebula like the word had corners. In the hands-on gallery, Evan pressed both palms to the cold dome of the Van de Graaff and flinched when his hair lifted. He laughed first loud and clean, then Tyler laughed too. At the gravity well, they rolled a handful of coins along the funnel until everything spiraled the way orbits do when you think you've got them beat. Evan walked the timeline on the floor earth, a dot near the end heel to toe, whispering numbers that had too many zeros to make sense. We ate cupcakes by the gift shop under a mobile of moons. I stuck a candle in a paper cup because the rules didn't like open flames, lit it with a single match, and cupped my hand to keep the light. "Happy birthday, Mr. Padilla," said, photographing the way Evan's cheeks rounded when he blew. The camera clicked and spat a square that developed while we watched the picture surfacing slow as a shallow-bottom fish. Evan wrote the date on the white border and slipped the photo into his field notebook like a pressed leaf. In the Dome Theater, the lights dimmed until the ceiling turned into a bowl you could tip and drink. The show began with a flight over the desert. We recognized, then lifted us past the city grid into the part of the dark that doesn't belong to anyone. Evan sat forward, elbows on knees, the narrator's voice threading the constellations in a line even he could follow. When the Big Dipper curved into view, he nudged my arm and pointed with 2 fingertips, one for the star and one for the wish he wouldn't name. Afterward, out in the hot noon, we ate pretzels on the low wall by the entrance and watched a toddler chase his own shadow. Then Nora loaded pretzel salt and kids into her car, and Mr. Padilla took a bow he said the camera required, and the others waved with hands full of gift shop stickers and small rubber planets. We stood for a minute in the quiet that follows a good thing, not trying to stretch it, just letting it sit. That evening, my phone buzzed with a new email from Rachel Order, extended through summer. I read the sentence twice and set the phone face down. Evan was at the table with his model solar system adjusting Jupiter's paint with the end of a toothpick. He didn't ask about the phone. I didn't offer. The household clock measured the hour with a sound we trusted. On Sunday, a rental car with Oregon plates pulled to the curb. Aunt Jo stepped out with a carry-on and a canvas bag that had seen rain. She hugged me like a person who remembers your height from when you were 12 and the way you cried when the school play ended. "Traffic over the pass," she said, as if we'd always lived within driving distance. She handed Evan a wrapped rectangle that felt like pages. Inside was a U-star atlas with someone else's penciled dots in the margins, and my father's name on the flyleaf in a hand I hadn't seen in years. "Your dad and I took this from a yard sale in '98, she said. "He said it already belonged to us." Evan traced the penciled dots and didn't speak, which is how he says thank you when the thing is the exact shape of his wanting. That night, Joe read the atlas with him on the couch, their heads tipped toward the same page, her finger tapping the key that explained symbols. She asked for stories, and I gave her one, then another, the kind you don't tell on the phone because the pauses get lost. Monday brought a letter via Rachel that used the phrase mistakes were made and invited us to a kind of therapy where the apology sat on a fence and didn't climb down. Rachel sent back the conditions we'd already set, and we heard nothing else. I printed the letter and placed it in the binder between the cease and desist and the order paper holding paper so the story stayed in order. By midweek, the glow stars we'd moved had learned their new places. After dinner, Evan and I sat on the back steps and held cold bowls while heat bled out of the gravel. He pointed his spoon at the first bright thing and misnamed it deliberately so I could correct him, which is his favorite game. The lock chirped when I went in for napkins. When I came back out, he had arranged 3 arroyo rocks on the step, 2 gray and 1 striped, a small solar system that fit in a palm. "Mom," he said, "no wobble anywhere." "For my birthday this year, can I invite my real family?" "Who's that?" I asked, not testing him just to hear the list in his voice. He touched each rock as he spoke. "Tyler and his parents. Ms. Henderson if she wants. Mr. Padilla, Aunt Joe." He let his hand rest on the striped one. "And anyone who shows up." "Okay," I said. The wind moved the mesquite leaves the way a hand moves a page. Later in his room, he taped the Polaroid from the planetarium above the desk and slid the star atlas onto the shelf between the rocket fuel book and a library loan on meteors that was due Thursday. He put his notebook under the pillow and turned on his side. I stood a minute at the door and listened to the house-behave refrigerator tick of the hall clock, a car far off taking the turn too fast and then correcting. Downstairs, I checked the back door. The keypad's glow was the same as ever, 4 squares steady in their corners. I turned off the lamp, and the room kept a little of the twinkle lights the way it sometimes does when paper and glue and small planets have had a good day. Upstairs, the plastic constellations held the last of the light. Evan breathed like someone who had walked a museum and counted a pendulum and eaten a pretzel in the sun. I lay down and let the ceiling find me where I was. The house stayed quiet, not because quiet had been promised, but because many small things had been arranged to let it be. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.